and welcome to my channel. Today I want to make a video on something that I had brought up in a prior video, but I wanted to expand on it. So today's video is going to be about my experience with breast implants, and more specifically breast implant illness. Maybe a bit of a longer video, but I don't even know why I say that because I blabber on anyways as it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. So I had mentioned that I was very insecure about my chest size, honestly, since grade school. I mean, it started really, really early. And then when I realized that even when puberty hit, that it wasn't going to hit that area, it was something that only got worse with time. Of course, now I know that it wasn't that it was my chest was too small or anything like that, but it was that I was insecure and I was unhappy with myself and I had low self-esteem and low self-confidence. But I've already talked about that. So when I was 20 years old, I decided to get breast implants. I thought I had done my research and I found a really good plastic surgeon, had great reviews. I really liked him and I trusted him, and it's not that I don't trust him now. I think that just like with any type of medicine or doctors, um, information changes as time goes on. So I wanted to say that as well. So I started as a 34B. I was probably about 25 pounds heavier than I am right now. I started at 34B and I moved up to 36D to double D. So they were big. And at that time they still weren't necessarily big enough, but nonetheless I get the implants put in. And I was a relatively healthy person then up to that point. Even though my lifestyle wasn't fantastic at that time, I was still relatively healthy. Well, the first thing that started being a little bit strange was my periods. I started to have pain with them, and they were sort of sporadic and all over the place. And I had always had a little bit more, I guess, of painful periods, but they did have a cycle to them. So about 6 months in, I noticed that my cycle was sort of all over the place. Sometimes it was 50 days, sometimes it was like 23 days. So it was really unpredictable, and I started having a lot of pain as well. And I thought, this is strange. Ultimately, they found out that I had endometriosis, and so I had surgery on that. But that was the first kind of, that's weird, like where did this come from that happened? Thyroid issues started as well. I didn't have very much energy. I didn't feel good. I was losing hair, and I went and I got labs, and I found out, my thyroid's messed up. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of relatively common to be diagnosed with Hashimoto's. So again, I didn't think too much really about that. I started noticing some digestive type issues not too far after that, and I would say since my lifestyle, I had never necessarily been perfectly regular, but it became worse. And I started to have more bloating and more actual distension. Bowel movements became longer in between time. So there was a lot of like little changes that started to happen. And those were the first three things that I started to notice early on, was with my thyroid, with my menstrual cycle, and with my digestive system. And that was that was within the first year. And so that was in 2006. I had, like I said, surgery for endometriosis. Then I had surgery, and then I went back in another time because I had more. And so it was pretty crazy. And I was married, and we wanted to have children. So around a little bit, I guess it was the end of 2006. The implants came May of 2006. So that same time when I started having issues with my cycle, of course, we started trying for a baby. And it wasn't happening, and it wasn't happening, and it wasn't happening because I couldn't predict my cycle. I was trying to track my basal thermometer temperature and trying to track ovulation, and there was just, I couldn't, because it was all over the place. There was no rhyme or reason, seemingly, and plus I was having issues controlling my thyroid. So we tried for a while, and then in the beginning of 2008, we started different tests for infertility, and we were seeing a reproductive endocrinologist. And we soon found out, no surprise, it was me, I was the problem, and I wasn't ovulating. In 3 months' time, I didn't ovulate even once. So we started with Clomid, and I really did not do well with that. I developed a bunch of cysts all over. So the reproductive endocrinologist decided to skip over the intrauterine insemination and go to in vitro. And thank goodness, we put 3 embryos back, and I was blessed with 2 beautiful, amazing, smart, funny, wonderful girls that are now 11 years old. But it was really difficult because that's a lot of shots. And I'm not scared of needles, but I mean, how many times can you jab yourself to get pregnant? And then when I was pregnant too, I had to go on bed rest at 20 weeks, and that was for 17 weeks because I had them at 37 weeks. I had the pups rash, and I had this bed rest, and it was a really uncomfortable pregnancy, but entirely worth it. So that was kind of the first reproductive type thing. Then what started to happen was my digestive issues started to really ramp up. And whereas I said that I was irregular, it was worse than that. My stomach, when I would eat the smallest thing, I'm not talking about bloating, would distend to what I looked like when I was like 5 months pregnant with twins. And it hurt, and it was uncomfortable. It got to the point where I wasn't having bowel movements at all. I was taking 10 stimulant laxatives to try to make something happen, and it wasn't happening. There was one time I went a month, and you're probably thinking, like, how is that? Well, I got to the point where I couldn't eat, and I was uncomfortable, and I was in pain. So I saw a gastroenterologist, and I got put through a whole host of tests that you would never even think is possible. There's something called an anorectal manometry to make sure that the muscles in your rectum were good. There was something else, I can't recall what it was called, but essentially you, just like you have a barium swallow to see what's going on to your stomach and the upper half of your digestive system, you essentially have to expel on a toilet in front of an x-ray that the technologist is watching to see like how that looks. So there were some really bad tests that I had to do, but ultimately I was diagnosed with colonic inertia, which is essentially where the colon just stops, the muscles stop working. I guess the vagus nerve isn't stimulated, and it does not allow the contractions to move the food down. And it wasn't working like at all. I had where I had to swallow these pills, and they tracked those throughout my digestive system. After 2 weeks, I still had some, and a good portion of them in the transverse colon, which is not how it's supposed to be. So it was really, really bad. At the same time, I was diagnosed with, it was mild at the time, gastroparesis. I did a gastric emptying scan, and I was diagnosed with mild gastroparesis. But ultimately, we ended up, because I was having so much issue with we made the radical decision to have my large intestine removed. And I had a colectomy. I don't have a bag or anything. We did an ileorectal anastomosis, so they take about 1 inch of the colon and they, not of the, well, yes, of the colon, and they hook it to the small intestine. And I know this is probably very medically speaking, but just so you can see how extreme that is. And that's 7 feet of colon. I have a picture of it. I'd be happy to share it. That they removed. And it was the right decision, 100%. I got, in many, many ways, a lot better at that point. So I was doing okay around 2012, maybe 2011, 2012, I started having more issues. So I was still having issues with the digestive system. My stomach wasn't emptying, and with gastroparesis, that's paralysis of the stomach. So food was fermenting inside my stomach, which was causing nausea, vomiting, and really a hard time, and a lot of pain, and really a hard time digesting anything. And it would sort of come and go in cycles with the gastroparesis. At the same time, with my menstrual cycle, I didn't stop bleeding. I didn't stop bleeding for about 4 months. And we tried hormonal everything, and I would not stop bleeding. So of course my iron levels, my hemoglobin, all that was going down. I started having neurological type issues. So I would have tingling, and I would lose feeling and I was constantly getting dizzy, and I could no longer sleep. And I started having central apnea. I had to do a sleep test, and it's not anything up here. It has something to do with my brain. And I started having other issues. So I was seeing at this point a cardiologist because I was having palpitations and my heartbeat was erratic. So I was seeing a gastroenterologist, an endocrinologist, and an OBGYN, and a neurologist, because they thought I got to the point where I couldn't feel, I couldn't grip good, I was shaky all the time. So a neurologist, they thought maybe it was the start of multiple sclerosis because I was having some autoimmune type problems. And then a cardiologist as well. And at this time, I was like 26, 27 years old. So as time went on, at this point I started to change my lifestyle a little bit because I also developed food allergies all of a sudden, and I was choking. So I developed an allergy to soybeans and to gluten as well. So that was kind of what fast-tracked me, I guess you would say, to getting whatever health that I could controlled. But with the bleeding, we made the decision at the very young age of 28 to have a radical hysterectomy. I don't have ovaries, I don't have fallopian tubes, I don't even have a cervix because they couldn't get it under control. So I'm on a patch for that. After that, like obviously the bleeding started to stop. I continued having issues now with breathing. And so I was seeing a pulmonologist, I was still seeing a cardiologist, I had a cardiac event monitor, and I'm still having a lot of different issues with sleep and with my thyroid and with my pituitary gland, and they were very confused. I had went to the Cleveland Clinic and they just didn't have a whole lot of information of what was going on because seemingly every single part of my system, all my systems were just shutting down. And I would continue to develop lumps in my breast, so I had surgery to remove that. I started struggling really, really badly back in about 2016, and my gastrocreasis was the worst that it ever was. I went 9 months on baby food and a liquid diet because I could not even digest water sometimes. And I was getting very, very sick. And with gastrocreasis, you can not do much about that. They do have a gastric pacemaker, but none of the doctors near me would even suggest that because they didn't believe that it worked. You could take Reglan, which is a black label medicine, and because it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and so they did put me on that for a little bit to try to help me out. I was still having dizzy spells, sleeping, started having urinary tract infections and other urinary type problems, but really at that time the gastrocreasis was really bad. And remember, I'm already missing my large intestine, and they said, well, you may have to place a TPN tube and you may have to be on a feeding tube. And I was really active at this time, and I was still doing the very best that I could do, and I was struggling, and I was losing weight, and I was tiny, and I didn't feel good, and I didn't have energy, I didn't have any of that. And so I was ready to do the feeding tube, but boy is it lucky. I found another lump in my breast, and I was basically, I told the doctor they don't know what it was. I went through all of those tests, and because they couldn't really see the images of the ultrasound, because I have a lot of, I can't even remember what it's called right now. I'll come back to that. But essentially sometimes there's a certain type of tissue or something that some people have, that some women have in their breast, and so they have issues with ultrasounds and mammography. So they sent me to a surgeon since I had already had surgery on that. And bless this surgeon's heart, because the information that he gave me, I believe, saved my life. I really do. Because the feeding tube eventually, that was one that was no way to live. The neurological problems, the problems with my heart, everything was just a problem. Like it was going to take me. And I didn't even have an answer what it was that was taking me. So this surgeon said, you have breast implants. There has been some information put out there now that sometimes breast implants can cause issues like this. And I said, really? Like, I don't really think about that. Mine are saline. And he said, well, first of all, saline is wrapped in a silicone sort of pocket, but it wasn't that. It was the autoimmune type responses that happen. And he said, well, think about it this way. When someone has a blood transfusion or they have a knee replacement, they get put on immunosuppressants many times. And he said some people, and maybe it could be everybody just to varying degrees, when they have these foreign objects that are placed inside them, their body fights and fights and fights and fights, like it's supposed to do. It's an immune system, but eventually is unable to identify what's foreign and what's not foreign, hence all the autoimmune issues and all of these different type symptoms that I was having, with the 7 different doctors. And I thought, okay, well, I'll look into it before I have my feeding tube placed, before I have another surgery on my breast to remove a lump. And I found a group on Facebook, had 30,000 women. It's Nicole's breast implant illness, something, I don't remember the exact title. I think there's probably over 200,000 now. And I started looking into some other research and papers, and I thought this really could be it. But at the very least, I was so desperate because I couldn't eat, and I was in so much pain, and I had no energy, and it was really starting to get to me. The other thing was, I forgot to mention this part, is the dental part of it. I'd never had a cavity, and then all of a sudden, I lost 2 teeth. I had 2 teeth fall out. And I'm happy that I have a healthy smile back now, but that really hit me. I started having different cavities, and all my dental problems started then too. So it did affect every single facet of my life. And so I said, you know what, at the very least, it can only help, it can't hurt. I was desperate. So in October 30th of 2017, I had my breast implants removed. And within a few weeks, I tried my first bite of food, and I was okay. Within a few more weeks, I was actually being able to eat all real food. My neurological problems, I wasn't getting dizzy as much, my heart rate had started to level out, and this is probably through the next 2 to 6 months then at that point. Almost every single one of my symptoms now are gone. Now, of course, there are some lingering problems from really kind of radical surgeries. So I can't grow my large intestine back. My vagus nerve is really messed up, so gastroparesis may be something that my digestive system will not always work at optimal capacity. But that's okay, it's much, much better, and I can eat real food, and I have a healthy lifestyle, and I have the energy now to do that. I didn't even realize. I thought, oh, being a mom, and of course, it was just that I wasn't sleeping. My brain fog, I had so much brain fog I didn't even realize was a symptom. And after like 2 months, I'm thinking, wow, for the most part, you may be doubting this now, words come to me, I can have an eloquent conversation, even brain fog I didn't realize. And you could say, well, that's a placebo, your symptoms are better. It wasn't just that all my symptoms disappeared, but it was also that the different tests that I had, when I had an endoscopy, my stomach is emptying better at this point. I didn't have food in there like I would normally have when I would go in there, even though I had fasted. It was blood tests. So my thyroid level went from over 150 micrograms on my thyroid medicine to now I'm on 75, which is huge. My white blood cells were consistently elevated and high, and now those have been fine for quite some time. So I tell you this because I definitely feel like I've been through a lot, and I feel like a lot of my emotional healing came after I was able to fix the physical healing part that I had. And I know that there's a lot of women that have breast implants, and there's a lot of women that are thinking about it. And I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not a doctor. You can take this at face value. I'm sharing my experience. But it changed my life entirely. You can't very well enjoy big boobs when you feel bad all the time and when you're in pain all the time. Like it did nothing for me. So I've had quite a few women since that time who have said, you know what, I was thinking about getting implants and now I'm not sure. And I say, don't do it. That's just me. Don't do it, because I also have been met with probably 2 dozen other women who have had the same experience, maybe not exactly the same, but very, very similar, have removed their implants. I've had other women message me on social media with their symptoms, and I'm saying, like, I don't know, like, it might help. And then they ultimately remove them, and it does help. So I share this because I feel like somebody can take something from this. And I think it's important to see just how much physical stress, challenges, trauma that I've had, and that, you know, your body doesn't know the difference between physical and emotional trauma. And you can't have healing emotionally without physical healing, or not as well, and physical with emotional and mental too. So I hope this will help somebody. I'm so happy that I had them removed. The other question I get sometimes is, well, do you miss them? No, I don't, because I love who I am in my skin. I think I look more natural, looks good on me, and they're comfortable, and I can move well, and I'm healthy, and that is something that is priceless. So no, my answer to that is I don't miss them. I don't regret it. The only thing I regret is maybe that I have done it sooner, but at the same time, I feel like I had to experience everything that I did to be able to share this with you all. And so I have a lot of gratitude towards that. So this is sort of off topic of everything else I've discussed, but I think that it's important, and I hope that this helps. Feel free to share this if you know any women that may be struggling, or if you're considering getting implants. I highly urge you do a great deal of research, and not from the manufacturer and not from your plastic surgeon, but take an objective approach to making that decision. So thank you everyone for listening if you made it through, and I hope you all are doing well. Have a good day.